Hi, welcome back. 75% of the nation's seafood is imported already. 87% is imported in New South Wales. 87% of the seafood you eat is imported. Why? Because of decades of policy that has removed the public's rights to access seafood. The public accesses their seafood through the commercial fishing industry, or they can go fishing for themselves. Now, the latest reform has decimated the industry, and I'll give you 3 examples of fisheries. 57.9% of the state's estuary meshing fishes have been restricted to between 55 and 93 days. 79% of the estuary hauling fishes have been restricted to 60 to 96 days, 58% of which can only work 60 days in a year. And the handlining fishery, 60.1% of the fishers that own a handlining endorsement can't use it, and they still have to pay it. Next up, after this short break, we are going to talk with Mary Howard from New South Wales and Elaine Lewthwaite from Queensland. Hello, Mary and Elaine.
Hi, Dane. How are you this evening?
I am absolutely fantastic. Now,
good afternoon to you, Dane, and to you, Mary.
Afternoon, Elaine.
So, I'd like to congratulate you two. There is not many more deserving of the honour you've just received through Women's Industry Network Seafood Community, and now Women in Seafood Australasia.
Big change, Dane.
Very big. And a big congratulations too to the rest of the ladies who were honoured, especially Margaret Stevenson, who couldn't be with us in this particular interview, but she'll come on in due course. So, fabulous. I'm glad you three have been recognised for all the work you've done, not just for years, but for decades.
Thank you. Exactly that. It has been, for me, just on 2 decades for the connection with WinSec.
Wow.
Let's move on to wiser and be wiser.
Yes, I agree, Mary. Absolutely. Yes, congratulations to all the other ladies for decades of hard work right across Australia, and hopefully the next 20 years for the young girls are not as tough as what we've had to put in.
Yeah, well, not many people realise how much work gets done behind the scenes. And even in your case, Elaine, you've just back in August, was it? You've had the Hervey Bay Seafood Festival, which has been running how many years now?
Well, that was a year 20 as well. So 20 years ago, a lot of work went into the formation of both the Women's Network and to our festival. Yes, we had our 20th festival, and it was a magnificent occasion. I think it's fair to say it was the best ever and the best seafood festival in Australia, and a fabulous promotion for wildcat seafood direct from the fishermen's hands to some 8,500, 9,000 seafood consumers were in that paddock that day.
So tell me, is there much realisation now within the seafood consuming public of what is actually happening to their seafood producers?
I think there is a growing realisation of from the seafood consuming public that their seafood producers are in peril of being, put out of business, to put it bluntly, in many cases. And in turn, I think people certainly are realising that their own access to seafood, because in their busy lives they're not going out and going fishing themselves, so they're realising now that their fisherman is somebody who's becoming more important to them. I'm not saying that we can stop there. This is just the beginning, and I think the momentum is there to drive this further with, dare I say, a great campaign to let the rest of the seafood consumers and just ordinary foodies know that our seafood is becoming more difficult to put on their plates, not because of droughts, not because of cyclones or anything, but because of bureaucracy and fisheries management that is just totally unrealistic for a food-producing industry.
Well,
I'd like to add to that.
Yeah,
and
go, Mary.
What we need more than anything is recognition by government that they, in their very process of management regime, are actually demonising the commercial fishing industry and the wild harvest by the way they present their management process, and to the point that they have literally indoctrinated our communities to believing that the commercial fishing industry remains unsustainable and that it needs to be reduced and removed and restricted and reviewed continually. And this is just not the case.
So, just on that, just quickly before I move on to reform related in New South Wales, many have seen a link between the federal funding that comes into the seafood industry and seen that there seems to be a bit of favouritism towards aquaculture and recreational fishing at the demise of commercial fishing. Now, I'm not saying that aquaculture is bad or recreational fishing is bad, but there shouldn't be we're going to go this way at the expense of this. Do you see that link, Mary?
Oh, most definitely. And it also rolls over to funding to studies, and studies that are done at federal level that roll over to states and picked up by lobby groups in the state. And when it becomes an issue for the commercial fishing industry and favours either environment or recreational fishing, it's no longer a federal issue. It becomes a state issue. And therein lies the politics of the numbers game. And so the more they continue to reduce the number of commercial fishers and their access, the greater the power that sits with the recreational fishing lobby group as well. Their number is also supported by the recreational fishing fee that the government itself collects. So you are in a no-win situation.
So speaking of studies and independent reviews and restrictions and so forth, I've got some figures as of October 30th, so yesterday, or actually 2 days ago, because this video will be posted tomorrow. So as of October 30, 2018, in the estuary meshing fishery, 57.9% of the mesh fishers have been restricted to between 55 and 93 days a year. In the estuary hauling fishery, 79% have been restricted to between 60 and 96 days. and 58% of those are on 60 days. And then in the handline fishery, 60.1% of the state cannot go to work in that fishery anymore, but are paying for the right to hold the shares. Now, Mary, the reform had the subsidised share trading market. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the local MPs ensure fishers that they would be able to buy the amount of shares they needed to continue to do what they were doing before?
That's my understanding, and don't worry, you will be looked after. If you go into share trading, you would be looked after. And it is just not the case. There are winners and there are losers in this whole process. There are fishers who've walked away with windfall of wealth gains, and there are fishers who will never get back what they've lost because they are in debt already and cannot afford to take more debt. And so they have to lose because there's no way of them getting back unless they sell. And if they sell what they've got, that reduces their capacity to make up what they had in the first place. So they are in a no-win situation.
So, Elaine, does this give you
shocked.
any insight into the Queensland reform?
I'm absolutely shocked. Absolutely shocked to hear the figures of the loss of, let's call it work time, the loss of work time for a man to produce or a woman to produce an income to feed their families. Would that be acceptable in any other business grouping? Would it be acceptable for 60% of stores to have to close their business in a town and only work 40% make the income? I just cannot see that this is acceptable in anywhere else. So why should that be acceptable in our industry? Is it time that some sort of inquiry, royal commission into the way that the wild catch seafood is managed in this state, in this country by the states? Because we've got all these states with their own let's call them small management regimes. We've got people suffering, and I don't see a much better picture for the small-scale fishers in Queensland either at this point. I hope I'm wrong, but at this point in time, I can't see any light at the tunnel that will inspire young people to say, I'm going to take this up as my career.
Yeah, if it works in Queensland like it has in New South Wales, it would be devastating because it is devastating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the single most reality check came when the government then came out with their Hawkesbury Shelf bioregion proposal for a new marine park across the Region 5 areas and a little sort of just bordering on Region 6. And again, more access was proposed to be removed from the industry, having just put them through a reform where they had to invest to try and purchase shares to do no more than what they had already been doing, because the government in its wisdom chose for the initial group that went through the reform to divide the catch history amongst all the participants, region by region, equitably. So they got equal catch. Our fishers were given preview shares in 2004. They were then converted to shares 2007 in perpetuity. 10 years later, they are put through this process where all their work and catch history build-up is divided with everyone.
Yep.
So
yes.
the winners and the losers are just across the state, unless you were able and had the funds up your sleeve to buy inactive up or another fisher wanting to go, you're down the tube if you didn't pick up in the share trading.
Just on the winners and losers, Mary, government would always argue there's winners and losers in every reform process. But this seems to be a bit different because they've thrown 15.5 million just into the subsidised share trading, and to have the majority of these fishers with under 100 days to go to work, that is, to me, an absolute failure.
Well, just having people paying for something they can't even go to work on is a failure. The very first option that came out for the prawn trawl fishers in the Hawkesbury was 90 days work, which was reviewed and rejected, and then it came back that the fishers who had 150 shares then have to purchase another 50 shares to get to 200 shares to be able to work. And if you didn't get that 50 shares and get to that 200, you don't work. Reform, on the one hand, you can understand if it's voluntary participation agreement process. There was nothing that I could see about this reform that was voluntary, agreed to go ahead. Over 90% of the industry was rejecting the design of this reform. Statewide, they were rejecting it. The parliamentary inquiry, the majority of submissions from the industry rejected process, rejected the design of this reform. They went ahead irrespective.
So let's move on from the reform, because we could talk all day about the reform. That much has happened. So, Elaine, I've noticed a few comments of yours around the place, and you refer to gaslighting. Do you want to let us in on what your thoughts are with gaslighting?
Well, I've been following a number of things, and I keep coming back to the fact that in so many instances, a section of the industry or sections of the industry at some time are subject to what is commonly known as gaslighting, whilst it's linked to other areas of abuse. But let's say it is a type of mental stress, mental abuse. You know, when you look at Wikipedia and what gaslighting means, it's about a tactic to gain more power or make people question their reality. So I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, gee whiz, that sounds like some of the fishermen. You know, for decades we've been subject to that we are less than environmentally responsible, not caring for things, which is not true. We're always talked down in so many aspects. So this verbaling, I sort of think, yes, does it have a common thread with gaslighting, where people question their own memory, their perception of things, and it's a known tactic in psychological warfare. So has this industry been gaslighted is my question.
Well, Mary, do you want to respond?
The term is appropriate, I would say, Elaine. I refer to it as discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
I refer to it as bias management, unfair and unreasonable, because the sustainability debate over and over again in New South Wales since 1994 has always resulted in the loss of access to commercial fishers, the loss of fishers themselves, the loss of recognition, and always downturning their practices. So you don't get that in reverse in terms of recreational fishing. It has been minister after minister after minister, and they talk about the sustainability of the resource, and we must manage our resources for sustainability. And when that minister gets through what he's going to do, it's always a reduction, removal of commercial fishers and their access.
Mary, I absolutely agree. And I think that as we're moving on and we're seeing people's quality of life being impacted, diminished by this continual push for reduction by the commercial fishing sector, and we're now seeing the impacts on their everyday life, I think it's time that, yes, we do ask the questions about why and how this is happening and how we put a stop to the disrespect of the commercial fishing industry in so many quarters. Has it been a long, slow process? Has it been a strategy? I don't know. They're my questions I'm asking. I will be looking for answers as well, too.
I definitely, there has been a strategy towards good governance. I can't remember the name of it, Dave, but the Rawlings report is all about the adjustment of commercial fishing to the benefit of recreational fishing. And it's pre-2000, and I just wish I'd had a look at my book before I came in. Now, that book sets about evaluating our fisheries, sets about the introduction of a fishing licence fee for recreational fishers, and utilises the strategy that this is a way to raise funds to remove commercial fishers. Actually acknowledges that if you're not careful, you will overdo the run and take out too many commercial fishers, has in it the way to assess the fisheries to do this. So yes, and funded by the federal government. So you're right, there has always been a strategy, and there have been meetings held nationally for that strategy, a strategy to reduce the number of commercial fishers in each state.
We're going to have to wrap it up here, ladies, I think. We've come to about 21 minutes now, and I haven't even put the end on or anything. I did expect that, though. I know how full of knowledge you two are, so we are going to have to do this again. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dane. Thank you, Mary.
I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night, Elaine.
That was Elaine and Mary. Now, to finish off here, things need to occur. We need the consumer on board. We need the consumer to email their local members because they're being taken advantage of. Their resource is being taken by not only the government, but lobby groups who either don't want anyone eating seafood or just don't want the public eating seafood because they want all the seafood to themselves. So start to get involved. All it takes is a quick letter to the minister's office, your local MP, or anything like that. It all helps. And even going into your local seafood outlet and asking where that product comes from. Even your restaurants, ask where the product's from. Because it's important. The more you ask, the more they're going to think, oh, I need to buy some good local product. I'd like for you to leave some comments. This will be shared, so just make sure if you're going to comment, just so that I can see it, make sure you come back to the Commercial Fishing Media page. Leave me some comments about what you thought about those figures, what you thought about the discussion we've had in this episode, and we'll leave it there. I'll see you in the next one.